don't think you need to have 30 or 40% cash down, in order to get a loan to, do a business acquisition or a partner buyout or whatever it might be in the SBA space.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
And welcome back to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out once again in the podcast chair. Have a great interview coming up for you. I think you're really going to enjoy this upcoming interview. I want to pause here and, of course, remind you of some great sponsors here. Of course, Alamode has been with us from the very beginning. Folks, I tell you, there's a lot of software out there. Alamode is where it's at when it comes to form-filling software for appraisers. Check them out by going to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. Of course, Datamaster, saving appraisers about, 40 minutes, 45 minutes per report. You can check them out by going to datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. And of course, where are you getting your E&O insurance? If you're not with OREP, you need to check them out. That's orep.org. Again, it's orep.org. Folks, I want to introduce you to a great guest. His name is Matt Dolsky. He's the Vice President of Business Development Officer for Byline Bank. Matt, welcome to the program, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me, Dustin. Appreciate it and happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. You've got kind of an interesting thing to talk to us about. But before we dive into that, I want to get to know you a little bit better. Tell the appraiser listeners out there, and I would say 90+% of my listenership is appraisers, a little bit about yourself, because you're not an appraiser.
No, I'm not. I am a lender.
Okay,
and
awesome. So what's your background?
Based here out of Grafton, Wisconsin, which is 60 degrees and unseasonably sunny today for March in Wisconsin.
Nice.
I've been in banking for my whole career, and really focused just kind of accidentally, how you fall into certain niches in SBA lending, which is what I wanted to talk to you and your listeners about today, because I think there is some need for financing potentially in that appraisal space.
Okay, and we're going to dive into that in just a little bit. But tell us about you. Where'd you grow up? What are your hobbies? What got you into banking?
Sure. So I, as you can kind of see from the background here, I do enjoy hunting and getting out west, out by you when I can. Other than trying to get in a hunting trip or a fishing trip here and there, I have 3 young children and a wife here with me in Wisconsin. Hopefully you won't hear any one of them yelling or screaming outside the door during the podcast.
We're pretty flexible if we do.
Yeah, it seems like kind of the norm nowadays. So, when I'm not trying to do SBA loans, I'm, wrangling a 5'3" and a 6-month-old.
Nice. What about the banking side of things? What got you in there?
Yeah, it was just something, when I went to school, I graduated from University of Wisconsin here in Milwaukee. I went to school for finance. I knew that banking was something that I wanted to go into. I had no idea that I was going to end up in this kind of SBA world. But that's, the bank that I actually work for now. We were called Ridgestone Bank then. But it was the very similar management. Our original CEO retired, but a lot of the same management. So I've actually worked for Byline twice. I worked for them back in 2009 as an analyst, and then left and went into a management training program for another publicly traded regional bank. And then I came back to Byline in 2013 and came back to them as a lender. And so I've been doing predominantly SBA loans for them since 2013.
And by SBA, you're talking Small Business Administration, right?
Yes, thanks. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't use acronyms.
It's all good.
I'm sure you guys in the appraisal space have a whole lot of stuff that you could confuse me with your acronyms. But yes, SBA meaning Small Business Administration. 7A loans is the name that they have for their program. That's typically the loans that we do. We also do some 504 loans, which is more of a real estate and equipment program. But I think for your listeners, my guess is where a lot of their need would be within that SBA 7A space.
Right. Okay. So before we get into the SBA side of things and why I wanted to have you on the program, let's talk a little bit about Byline Bank, because frankly, before I heard of you and before we talked, I'd never heard of Byline Bank. Maybe I have, and maybe it's, went in one ear and out the other. It's not like I drive down the street and say, oh, there's another Byline Bank. So tell us a little bit about Byline for those that have not heard of it.
Yeah, and that's not surprising at all that you haven't heard of it. And I'm sure the vast majority of your listeners probably haven't as well. We have our headquarters is in Chicago. We have a branch network in that area, but our group, which we call our SBA group, we call Byline Small Business Capital. We're not the type of bank that has a location on every street corner. We really have a focus in SBA, Small Business Administration lending. It's funny every time I say it that we are about 160 employees, and we're one of the top 5 SBA lenders in the country. Wow. By the dollar amount of SBA loans that we do. And the reason behind that is that it's really the one arrow in our quiver. I shouldn't say only one. We have 2 or 3, but it's really what our focus is. And I would say roughly 90% of our loans are SBA or in that SBA 7A space. So we like to think we're really good at it. It's basically all that we do. And we do it all over the country. So we don't have, I've done loans in Tampa, Florida, and in San Diego, California, and also right here in, my hometown in Grafton, Wisconsin. So we're very nomadic, and we're not the type of bank that just does loans to businesses that are right in our backyard. We have a national footprint.
Okay. So you reached out to me in 2020. We had a pretty interesting talk back then. I think, some of the listeners at this point are going to say, Dustin, where are you going with this? So what does this have to do with me? So let's talk about why you reached out to me in 2020.
Yeah. So I reached out to you because, and just thinking about where there are needs for SBA financing, the appraisal space was something that just seemed like a natural fit to me, where you're going to have a lot of transition, owners looking at exit planning. What am I going to do? How am I going to exit my business? And as a lender, if I can, we're not very smart, right? Us bankers, if I can do one loan 20 times, that is much better than doing 20 different loans, that are all different. Now each loan is unique, right? I mean, you're never going to have 2 requests that are the same. But it seemed to me that there was a need for financing in this space, and I found you by searching out people that were very active and knowledgeable in this space, and wanted to have a conversation because I think your listeners might be thinking about exit strategies for their business, and the SBA program might be something that affords them to do that.
Awesome. Well, during that conversation, Matt, you and I talked a little bit about, sales of appraisal businesses. It's not a common thing, especially on the residential side. I think maybe it's a little bit more common on the commercial side, but on the residential side, it's not something that typically happens. My listeners are very, very aware that typically what you look at is an appraiser who, maybe they're like me. They get into it because their father or their mother was involved in the appraisal space. It's very much a good old boys network, if you will. There's a lot of nepotism in this, but I think more and more appraisers are starting to wake up to the realization that they don't have to do things the way that everybody else did them, and retirement can look very different than it has for appraisers in the past. In fact, just recently, if the appraisers, the listeners want to go back to episode number 619, we interviewed an appraiser, Matt Friendaway, who built up his appraisal business and made it very sellable. In fact, sold his appraisal business and got a very hefty profit for it, and has now moved on to other things. So I think this idea of selling the appraisal business and actually seeing it as a business that they can sell, not just as a single person entity, is becoming more and more of a reality for some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's along the same lines as my thinking as well. And I think that again, every business is going to be unique, and you will have to talk about what the cash flow of the business looks like. How involved is the seller in generating revenue for the business? I think that's one thing that's really key for any buyer of a business to think about, is when this seller goes away, what's going to go away with them, right? I mean, and that's got to factor into how they think about the value of the business that they're paying for. but absolutely, I think there's opportunities for exit strategies that may be different than what people had thought of previously.
Right. Well, one of the things that I find as I coach and mentor other appraisers that are looking at this space, looking forward and saying, well, Dustin, I don't want to do this until I'm 90. I would love to have an exit strategy. There's lots of different exit strategies, but if one of them includes selling their business, and actually putting it on the market and either selling it to another appraiser or, like Matt did, he actually sold it to a investor who had never appraised a property in his life, is not an appraiser, was more interested in the cash flow of the business. One of the things that I will counsel them is the number one thing you've got to do is make yourself obsolete. As the business owner, you need to move from active to silent partner. And once you move to that stage by hiring other people and delegating and getting those systems up and running, that's when your appraisal business becomes valuable. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. We, I would call that, working on your business instead of working in your business. And that certainly is going for a buyer. A buyer's going to look at that. As a bank, when we underwrite a loan, it's something that we look at is what is the risk, that these cash flows that we're the buyers and we are dependent on to pay our loan back, and the buyers are going to be dependent on for putting money in their pocket. What is going to go away with that seller? And to your point, if the seller has made themselves obsolete, as you put it, in their business, that the prospects for that buyer are going to look a lot more positive as far as what they're going to be willing to pay for a purchase price. And from the bank side, we're going to be, much more willing to finance perhaps a larger part of it if, we believe that those, future cash flows, are going to be there.
One of the conversations that you and I had a few months ago was centered around the fact that you see, and I think we both see this, for some reason, and I think I know the reason, but just to put it out there on the table, for some reason, commercial appraisers, those that deal in that space more heavily than the residential side, seem to be clued in a little bit better as far as what that looks like, what retirement looks like, what it looks like to build up a business. And part of it simply is the industry that we're in. A lot of appraisers deal with clients, AMCs, direct lending, and that kind of thing that, that require that the appraiser who signs the appraisal also needs to be the person that actually does the walkthrough. So it's much more difficult to delegate like the commercial individuals can do. But what are some of the things that you're seeing? I know you deal with both sides, and probably from a banker's perspective, it doesn't matter much, whether it be commercial or residential. You're looking more for value, right?
Yeah, we're looking at cash flow, and value is ultimately got to be determined by buyers and sellers, right? The buyers got to be comfortable when their head hits the pillow at night that they're paying a value that they believe is fair, and the sellers obviously have to agree to that, and that's typically memorialized in an LOI or in a letter of intent even before we underwrite a transaction. There's got to be some structure around buyer and seller agreement for us to have a request to underwrite, because we're not going to say this is what the value of the business is. Now we're going to make a judgment about whether or not we will finance it. But ultimately, value's got to be determined by buyers and sellers. I think from what I typically see out there, and it's not even, I wouldn't even necessarily say it's specific to appraisal firms. I think it's any type of business. And this is take it with a grain of salt from a lender who does cash flow lending. Sure. But to me, everything is based off of cash flow multiples when it comes to value. Typically, we see businesses in the 3 to 4 times EBITDA. Now, EBITDA is a funny thing too. When I talk about EBITDA, earnings before depreciation, interest, and amortization, and taxes. And I joke with people something. If you put a buyer, a seller, and a transaction attorney and the banker all in a room and told us to come up with what the EBITDA of the business is, we all might come up with a different number. Right. But typically we see purchase price multiples, in that 3 to 4.5 times. And again, it depends on the size of the business, on the scope of the business, what buyers and sellers are comfortable with. But I would say that, generally that's what I typically see out there for, service type businesses, whether they be appraisal businesses or otherwise. Yeah. All kind of based off of cash flow models.
Awesome. We're speaking with Matt Dolsky. He's the Vice President of Business Development for Byline Bank. And I assume some of my listeners are saying, so what, Coach? Why are we doing this? What does this have to do with me? Well, stay tuned, because after the break, I want to get back into the nitty-gritty details with Matt and talk about how this can make a sale possible for your appraisal business, which means retirement might be possible. I want to pause here and remind you of 3 great companies that have been with me from the very beginning. And these are companies, folks, that I use personally. These are companies that I believe in, that I have faith in, and that I can freely testify that they've been a great blessing in my life. One of them, of course, is OREP Insurance. Right now, folks, right this moment, I'm in the process of renewing my insurance, and it was so easy. I reached out on an email. It was on a holiday. They returned my email within 10 minutes. I literally filled out their application in about 3 to 5 minutes, and super easy. And they're in the process right now of shopping some great rates for me. That's what's different about OREP, folks. They're not an insurance company. They're an insurance broker. Therefore, they will take your individual situation. They'll shop it around. They'll find the best deal for you. Check them out by going to OREP Insurance at orep.org. That's OREP.org. Speaking of watching out for appraisers and helping you to be better at what you do, please check out a la mode. Folks, I don't know what software you're using right now, and I know it seems like a big issue. Man, I don't want to change software. Folks, trust me, it will not be easy, but it will be worth it to take a look at another appraisal software that will allow you to do more, that will pay big dividends moving forward. It's a la mode software. You can find out more by picking up the phone, calling them at 800 a la mode, or pick up your computer, type in www.alamode.com. Again, it's alamode.com or 800 a la mode. Finally, we're sponsored by DataMaster. DataMaster, of course, saving appraisers time. When you save appraisers time, you save appraisers money. DataMaster is all about saving you time and making you more efficient. I've figured it out, folks. It's about, they say 30 to 60 minutes per report. For me, it's about 40 minutes, about 40 minutes of data entry that they will take off your plate very, very simply. If you have not checked them out recently, or maybe you've checked them out in the past, and well, they're not in my area. Well, folks, they have expanded, and many areas they are now in that they weren't in just a few months or a few years ago. Check them out. Go to datamasterusa.com. Don't forget the USA. datamasterusa.com. And welcome back to the program, everybody. We're talking with Matt Dolsky. He is the Vice President of Business Development for Byline Bank. And we're talking about SBA loans, but specifically we're talking about what this has to do with appraisers. And of course, we're not talking about you buying another appraisal office necessarily, although that could be part of this. We're talking about this frustrating thing where appraisers want to retire. They want to move on. We talked to Matt Friendaway here a few weeks ago about his sale of his appraisal business. Well, folks, when you sell an appraisal business, you've got to have a buyer, and a buyer has to have financing. And a lot of buyers don't have, the kind of money it will take to buy an appraisal business. But Matt Dolsky has a solution for that. Matt, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks. Great to be back, Dustin. Yeah, let's get into the weeds a little bit on what is possible with the SBA program, because that's, I think really important for your listeners to understand. So the first thing is collateral is not something that prevents us from doing an SBA 7A loan. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I have this great service-based appraisal business, but there's no collateral. A bank's not going to finance it because they can't take a lien on a piece of equipment or a piece of real estate.
Right.
I would just venture to make a rough guess that probably 80% of the business acquisitions or partner buyouts or any thing in that M&A space that I've done has been two businesses that don't have anywhere even close to one-to-one collateral in the conventional sense.
Right.
So what is possible with SBA loans is they have a minimum 10% cash equity requirement for a business acquisition, for a new buyer to come in and purchase it. A lot of people think, hey, if I'm going to get a conventional loan to buy a business that doesn't have any collateral, I'm going to need 30 or 40% cash.
I would think that 10% seems really low.
Yeah, it's that is the minimum SBA stated requirement per their standard operating procedures. Now, that doesn't mean that we do every loan at 10%. That's the bank's discretion, and like I mentioned before, every deal is different. So we'll look at it and see what makes the most sense for a particular request. There's even cases, and I've used this multiple times, where you can do a loan with as little as 5% cash down, and then the seller financing or seller paper, which is also something we could talk about because that's typical in most business acquisition transactions, has to be under certain terms. In order for you to do what I would call a 5% cash down, 5% seller financing. And I'll try not to drag your listeners too much into the SBA weeds and put them to sleep, but I just want them to know that it is possible to finance these type of acquisition scenarios with not the type of cash down that most people expect. If I could, Dustin, in that 5 example with 5% cash equity down and then a 5% seller note structure. Typically where I've seen us get comfortable with that is where you have somebody who's already working for, like let's say you have an appraiser owner, appraiser, they're want to exit, and maybe their number two or their general manager, somebody that's already inside that business and maybe running it even. We look at that as where, at least in my mind, that five structure is a little bit more doable because you don't have the transition risk of an outside buyer coming in. You already have somebody who knows the intricacies of that business and is running it. I know I kind of threw a lot at you there, but that would be the biggest thing that I would want your listeners to know is, don't think you need to have 30 or 40% cash down, in order to get a loan to, do a business acquisition or a partner buyout or whatever it might be in the SBA space.
Right. And I want to emphasize, we may have listeners out there that are looking at acquiring appraisal businesses, but really the focus of today's interview with Matt is to help my listeners who might be running a successful appraisal business or have goals to reach new levels with their appraisal business, answer the question of, and then what? Right. And what comes next? Now I'm 70, now I'm 75, and I don't want to do this forever. I don't want to be out there with my laser and my my computer or my clipboard and pen and tromping around in the snow and everything else. I want to have an exit strategy, but who's going to buy an appraisal business? Again, folks, number one, you've got to make yourself obsolete. So that means hiring other appraisers. That means growing. That means developing systems that work without you there. But then the next question is, well, who's going to buy my appraisal business, right? And who has the kind of money that I need for that type of service? That type of business is going to be greater than most other appraisers have, or maybe non-appraisers have. This is where Matt comes in. So Matt, talk to us about that situation. Let's just hypothetically say Dustin Harris is going to sell his appraisal business. He's got a couple of buyers lined up, but the kind of money that I want for my appraisal, I mean, we did over $1 million in revenue last year. In order for me to exit that kind of system, I've got to have a pretty high price tag. Who's going to have the money to be able to come in and buy my appraisal business? Well, I would say call Matt. And Matt, what would you say to that potential buyer?
Well, I'd certainly want to have a conversation with them to see what their, what their personal financial situation looks like, what they, might be able to put into a deal, what possibilities are there to structure. There's another avenue that I think is important in addressing your question, which is you might be talking about somebody that has another practice that already has an appraisal firm, and you had mentioned, expansion, and maybe it would be somebody that already has an existing firm that would want to buy somebody else's firm and roll that, into theirs, or however they would want to structure it, from, the legal entity perspective. That's an actually whole nother category of business expansion loans, where you can do business expansion or partner buyouts. If you have somebody who's already a partial owner, and maybe the existing or the majority owner is the one who wants to retire, and maybe it's somebody more junior that just has a little bit of ownership. Depending on, and I won't go into all the, into the weeds of the rules of you got to have this, debt to net worth ratio in the business. But I just want your listeners to know that it is possible in those expansion or partner buyout scenarios to even do 100% finance transactions through the SBA if certain thresholds are met. So, again, without going into all the, the kind of crazy specifics, what I would say is if there's somebody out there that's thinking about it, that wants to, just kind of, throw around some ideas or just have a conversation about what is possible, I would say the best thing to do would just be to reach out to me and let's talk about it. And like I've mentioned a couple of times, every person, every business situation is unique, and we don't, and we look at it that way. And let's have a conversation and let's see what might be possible to do from a financing perspective.
Love it. Love it. Let's say I'm listening to this and the light bulb has gone on. And I thought, well, maybe there's some opportunity here. Matt, how would people best reach out to you? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out to me would be either by email or by cell. My email is mdolsky, that's D as in David, OLSKY, at Byline Bank, that's BYLINE bank.com. I'll just say the whole thing again. It's mdolsky at bylinebank.com, or reach out to me directly on my cell, which is 414-202-3038. Again, 414-202-3038. I would welcome any calls or questions, and would love to have a conversation.
Love it, Matt. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much for the presentation. I love the opportunity that, appraisers get frustrated. I mean, we work hard, we build up these businesses, and then we think, okay, and then what? I mean, I don't want to just retire. I certainly don't want to do this forever. I love this inspiration of saying, you know what, there is some value out there. And for a potential buyer, there's opportunity out there through something like this. So Matt, thank you. I appreciate you taking time.
Really appreciate you having me on, Dustin. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. The pleasure is ours. And folks, if you're interested in growing your business in such a way that you can get to the point that it is sellable, that it is valuable, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or my assistant and look at the mastermind that we have across the country. We currently have 7 masterminds across the country, including 1 online mastermind that we have seats open, I think, in all of them but 1. Folks, almost anywhere that you can get to very, very easily on a plane, we will meet quarterly and help you to grow your business to the point that it could be sellable, that it could be this type of value. Check it out. Go to my website, theappraisercoach.com, to learn more. Again, it's theappraisercoach.com.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
All right, folks, I want to introduce you to a guest who has not been on the program before. His name is Matt Dolsky. He is the Vice President of Business Development. Sorry, editor, let me back up.